And welcome to another edition of the Eye Test on the Sick Podcast Network. Pierre, McGuire, Jimmy Murphy here.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. The Eye Test with Pierre, McGuire, and Jimmy Murphy.
The Stanley Cup winning Colorado Avalanche. And after 22 years, Raymond Mark!
The sickest NHL podcast. It's gonna be sick.
Welcome back to the Eye Test here. Post-Christmas, our first edition here on another day of World Junior Hockey, Pierre. And, man, as we speak right now, Canada just putting a whooping on Latvia. You kind of feel bad for Latvia. I mean, they've got great fans, and, you know, you don't want to see anyone get smoked like that, but it is what it is.
Well, this is a great Canadian team. It's not the best Canadian team I've ever seen over there, but it's a very good Canadian team, and it's led by the number one pick in this summer's draft is going to be Macklin Celebrini. And yeah. Jimmy, he's everything you're reading about and probably more. You got to remember, he's only a 17-year-old player playing in a tournament that's usually for 18 and 19-year-olds. He's dominating as a 17-year-old. Not an easy thing to do. But this tournament is a lot different than other tournaments because the Russians aren't there.
Yep.
And Jimmy, it just changes the dynamic of the entire tournament because anytime you play against Russia, whether you're an elite team or not, you got a chance to get beat. And in the case of not being an elite team, you got a chance to get beat real bad. So it changes the dynamic. There are three standalone teams right now in Sweden, Canada, and the United States. They're the three best teams. No other team in the tournament's close. Slovakia and Czech may have something to say about it. The Finns are already 0-2. Nobody thought that would happen. The Finns lost to Germany today. So, to make a long story short, this is a different World Junior because the Russians aren't there.
For sure. And speaking of, before we'll get right into the World Juniors there, I want to talk more about Celebrini, but some news yesterday, Pierre, too, that per the Russian president, the young, Russian players right now that are prospects in the NHL, drafted prospects, may not be allowed to leave for, they're saying, potentially 4 to 5 years, Pierre. I mean, that's tough.
Well,
that's going to put a dent in a lot of things.
Well, how about the Philadelphia Flyers?
Right.
And they made the right pick. There's no question they made a real good pick. But if they don't have that player for 4 or 5 more years after they draft him, that sets their development plan a little bit in disarray.
Right.
And then maybe it makes the Montreal Canadiens, who took Reinbacher, the defenseman who's playing in Switzerland right now, kid from Austria, maybe it makes their pick look a little bit better. So it's a different time in hockey. I spent a lot of time over in that part of the world trying to evaluate players and draft them or trade for them. And, this is probably this is the most unpredictable time, I would say, that I've seen in my career over the last 30 plus years. It's a really unpredictable time.
And Pierre, you combine, so you were just talking about how there's no Russia at the World Juniors. And now with that news, like, are we going to see any Russians get drafted in the first 2 rounds?
I do think we will. I'm not sure we'll see them be drafted if they haven't already left Russia.
Yeah, that's a good point.
I think we will. But kids that are having to go back and forth to Russia, I'm not sure we will. I don't know. I don't know that. I haven't heard that sentiment expressed, but I think based on some of the things we're hearing out of Russia right now, anything's possible.
Yeah, and it's a shame, I mean, I get all the politics and what's going on in the world with the war, but it's a shame that these kids have to, pay the price for that. But anyhow, back to this tournament, talking about Celebrini. And of course, one of our first episodes in our on-campus segment, we had Jay Pandolfo on, and I just remember him raving about him and just how much he praised him for his work ethic and him wanting to learn the game more and more each day. And you can see that in the way he plays. There's little details that he has that are beyond his years, Pierre. It's really fascinating. Right now, as we speak, he's got a goal and 3 assists in this game. But yeah, I mean, you look at the way he thinks the game and his positioning, it's just fascinating.
Well said on all fronts. He's a dominant neutral zone player defensively and offensively. He's a dominant power play player, especially as a setup man, not so much as a gunner, but as a setup man, a little like Nick Backstrom with the Washington Capitals. There are little parts to Macklin Celebrini's game that mimic a lot of great players in the league. So there's a peripheral vision quality to his game that reminds me a lot of Peter Forsberg. I'm not saying he's Peter Forsberg, but there's a peripheral vision part to his game that reminds me of Forsberg. There's a passing component to his game that reminds me of Nick Backstrom. There's a neutral zone component to his game that reminds me of so many great wingers I've seen over time, but he's a centerman. So, there's components to his game that are just awesome. Is he as explosive as Nathan MacKinnon? He is not. Is he as explosive as Sidney Crosby? There's some similarities. Does he have some of the creative genius of Connor Bedard? Yes, he does. So, there's little things that he does. Is he as fast as Connor McDavid? He is not. He is not. But is he fast? Yes, he is. So I'm getting close to being ready to label him a generational player. It took me a long time to do that to Connor Bedard, and he clearly is one. There's no question, Jimmy. I'm getting really close to be able to say that about Macklin Celebrini. That's how good a player I think he is.
Muted, rookie mistake.
You'll have to start over again, young man.
So basically what I was saying was I see you guys. Oops, sorry about that, guys. I see you in the chat room right now. To our viewers, we will get to you in a second. I just want to touch on some NHL action tonight because there's 14 games across the board. The teams are coming back from the holiday break. And right out of the gate here, there's some really important games and matchups. And, you and I want to start off with the Pittsburgh Penguins at the New York Islanders. And, as we discussed in a few episodes heading into the break, it's do or die time for this Pittsburgh Penguins team.
So they're playing at Long Island tonight. And then before the New Year's Eve, they're playing against the Islanders at home in Pittsburgh. Jimmy, I will tell you this right now. That's about as large a 4-point type of game situation that the Pittsburgh Penguins will have faced before game 35 of this regular season.
Crazy.
And they better make sure they don't drop the ball. Last Saturday night they played in Ottawa. Ottawa had to win. They just lost 6 straight on the road. They come back home. They get their first win for Jacques Martin. They do it in extra time. I get it. And so Pittsburgh gets a point. They don't give up 2. They get a point. But now for Pittsburgh, the Islanders, if they want to catch them in the division, in the Metro, they're 7 back. They're 7 points back. They've got to win these next 2 games against the Islanders to make it realistic. If they don't and the Islanders win both, I don't think Pittsburgh can catch them. And then you got a big problem if you're Pittsburgh.
Well, and the thing, too, even if, let's say, they get these 4 points against the Islanders, right? But, still a lot of hockey to be played, Pierre, and there's so many teams in between them and that playoff spot. I'm talking just a wild card spot, too. And, we've been starting to hear before the break, we discussed it a bit heading into the holiday roster freeze. The trade chatter was picking up a bit. We're expecting maybe things might happen a little earlier than usual this season just because of all these teams being condensed there in the standings. But it's just like there's so many, when the end of the season, when you get into the final month, Pierre, and, you get those teams that are battling for the wild card spot, and a lot of them always have to depend on other things to happen. They're already at that spot, and that's going to be tough when you're heading, you're not even 40 games into the season, and you're praying for other things to happen that are out of your control. That's a tough spot to be in.
They're praying for Philadelphia to come back to earth, and that's not going to happen anytime soon. I really don't believe that. John Tortorella's done a magnificent job there as a coach, and a lot of those players deserve a lot of credit in Philadelphia. They really do. So hats off to them. But I don't think they're going to come back to earth anytime soon. The Washington Capitals, after a terrible start, they're starting to get going again, Jimmy. Tampa Bay has won 7 of their last 10. So, a lot of people, Tampa's not going to – well, no, Tampa's probably going to make it. Yeah. So you start to look at it for Pittsburgh. The options are shrinking, and that's why this 2-game set before we get to New Year's Eve, this next 2-game set with the New York Islanders is critical, I think, to their well-being as an organization this season.
Yeah, it sets the tone. And by the way, too, like a lot of people, I see fans on social media, too, some Penguins fans saying, maybe we should just say this is a wash and start. They're not gonna say it's a wash, Pierre, because as we discussed, they went shopping in the offseason big time. They didn't do that to halfway, not even halfway through the season to say, forget about it.
No, this is really important for Pittsburgh Penguin fans. they went all in to get Erik Karlsson. They went all in to try to win the cup. That's what the new management team told the owners when they were hired. We're in this to win it, and that was music to the ears of the owners of the Pittsburgh Penguins.
Of course.
And right now, that's not happening.
Yeah.
And when an airplane takes off, Jimmy, you can never sell that seat again. It's a highly disposable thing. Okay, you don't. When you don't make playoffs like the Pittsburgh Penguins didn't make last year, and you've got Sidney Crosby as an over 35-year-old player, and you got Evgeny Malkin over 35 years of age, and you got Christopher Letang pushing those magic numbers of 35 plus, you're starting to get like that airplane that will never sell those seats again. So every season that you're going without playoffs with Crosby, Malkin, and Letang being there, you got a problem. And then you add Karlsson, and you don't have a plethora of young prospects, you got a problem.
Yeah, so I'm sure this is going to be a hot topic for the rest of the season. Pierre, another thing that we think should be a hotter topic right now is what Auston Matthews is doing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And he's doing it in arguably the biggest hockey market. I know, no offense, Montreal. I go with Montreal, but, it's an argument to have one of the biggest hockey markets in the world. And it just seems like it's kind of under the radar is kind of strong, but it's not getting the love you would think.
No, it's not. I think as we go forward, it will. One of the things that I think they've done, Sheldon Keefe and his coaching staff, that's really smart, they stopped playing politics and try to put Auston Matthews with the very best players he could be with. So you put Matthew Nyes on that line. You already have, obviously, a tremendous chemistry there with Mitchell Marner and Auston Matthews. And so then you add the big body and the skating and Matthew Nyes, and all of a sudden you got this line that's virtually unstoppable, and they're just stockpiling points. And Matthews is stockpiling goals. It shouldn't be a foreign concept, though. It was 2 years ago that he had 60 goals. Last year he's got 40 goals. I mean, so this guy's going to get at least 50 this year. I think 70 is well within the realm of possibility, especially if Marner and he keep up the chemistry, and the addition of Nyes has helped a lot. But to me, it also says one other thing about Auston Matthews. He's tired of reading all the negative press about how he doesn't care.
Yeah.
This guy cares a lot. He is a passionate, winning kind of guy, and he cares a ton. He really does.
Do you put him in a Selke conversation as well?
I used to be able to do that. I don't know if I'll do it right away this year, but it's something that I think we should all monitor. And it's a great question, because I can tell you, when Donnie Granato was running USA Hockey, I used to go in there and break down tape with him when we'd have Red Wing games with Doc Emmerich, Eddie Olczyk, and I used to do the NBC games of the week, and we had Detroit on a lot. And I'd go in and watch tape with Donnie in Michigan. And the one thing that stood out, and I said this to Donnie at the time, I said, I had the privilege, and it was a privilege, to coach Ronnie Francis. And I said, he reminds me a lot of Ronnie Francis with more speed.
Yeah.
Now, Ronnie's a Hall of Fame player. It's not like Ronnie was a terrible. Ronnie was an amazing player. He was a winner. And to say that about Auston Matthews, for me, that had the privilege of working with Ronnie when he was an elite player, I think says a lot about Auston Matthews. And I do think at one point in his career, he will be recognized for how great a defensive player he is.
I'm with you. All right. Well, let's get over to our questions right now, because we are pressed for time today. So let's throw some up there. What do we got? Ooh, Marvin Matthews. Is there a 17-year-old USA player that compares to Celebrini? Great question, Pierre.
17-year-old, I can't say a 17-year-old U.S.-born player. But what I would say very easily, I remember a 16-year-old kid by the name of Crosby who was pretty good, and a 17-year-old kid by the name of Crosby who played with Patrice Bergeron and Corey Perry in the 05 World Junior, Sydney's draft year. And there was a lot of similarities between Celebrini and Crosby. I will say this. I think at the same age, Sid was a little bit better. I'm comfortable saying that. That's not a knock on Macklin Celebrini, by the way.
Yeah. Look, and that's not a knock on USA Hockey either. There's still great players coming out through the pipeline there. Where it's unreal what their program has become. And, we've discussed it many times on this show, but, I love looking at the teams. You were just mentioning the favorites there in Sweden, Canada, and the U.S., but you listen to people outside of the U.S. now talk about USA. Yeah. It wasn't that way when I was growing up or when you were growing up here, and it's pretty impressive. Well,
I remember their breakthrough. Their breakthrough year was 2004. That was when Sidney Crosby was 16 years of age, and the Americans had Al Montoya in goal. They had, tremendous players like Ryan Kessler playing on their team. But the truth of the matter was it was Zach Parise and Ryan Suter that really helped put them over the top, and Mark Stewart, who I believe was a captain of that team. But John Hines was an assistant coach in that team. Mike Eves was the head coach of that team. They were good, but they didn't have like superstar guys. You'd say, oh, this guy's a can't miss. You're going to see. They didn't have that. But I guess Cole Iserman is a guy that's close to Celebrini, and we'll see whether they're teammates or not down the road at BU, whether Celebrini goes back or not. But he's not on this team, and I still don't think he's as that same type of player as Celebrini.
But the fact that he's not on it says a lot about how it's stacked.
Well, so here's what it is. You look at, Cutter Gauthier is really good. Like he's an NHL player. When this season's over, he's going to be in Philadelphia. He's an NHL player. Ryan Leonard, Washington Capitals first round pick. He's an NHL player. Will Smith, San Jose Sharks player. He's an NHL player. I mean, you can go down the line of the American players. Lane Hudson's going to play in the NHL for Montreal Canadiens. So there's a lot of really, really high-end players on this American team. A lot of really. And the goalies are crazy. Yeah. Augustine and Fowler are probably the two best goalies in the tournament, and they're both on the same team.
I want to say, though, speaking of goalies, Pierre, and I'm kind of sidetracking here, you've been pretty impressed with the Canada side between the pipes, haven't you?
Yeah, Russo's been really good. He's a kid from Blainville-Boisbriand, which is just north of Montreal. He's a little undersized, and I hate to do this to young players that are undersized in that position. They don't always get a fair shot. This is an undrafted player right now. But there's a lot of UC Saros in that kid.
Ooh.
And, like UC Saros is a really good goalie. You ask Barry Trotz. You ask Andrew Burnett. You ask the guys working down in Nashville. He's their go-to guy in net. I'm not saying Russo's going to be that guy, but there's a lot of potential there, even though he's an undersized guy. It depends on whether you have an appetite for taking small goalies or not.
Right, I'm with you on that. Hey, we're working on getting a question up here because it just went to me personally on Twitter, so the boys are going to put it up in a bit. But Pierre, I want to get back to combination of NHL and World Juniors topic here. We were talking off the air about the Arizona Coyotes, and you look at some of the guys they got going in this tournament right now, and the future they have. They're playing the Colorado Avalanche tonight, and Pierre, I would say, at this point, it's not the sure shot win for the Colorado Avalanche that it has been over the years when they go into Arizona to play the Coyotes.
No, first of all, Mullet Arena is a really hard building to go in. I've seen pro games there and I've seen college games there. That's a tough place, number one. Number two, Arizona. Andre Tourigny, the coach there, is not getting enough love. That man is doing a tremendous job with his staff out there. He really is. And I think when you look at Bill Armstrong, Ryan Jankowski, John Ferguson Jr., they've got some really good hockey people in place with a lot of experience who I think have done a nice job. And I'll give you an example. You talked about depth at the World Junior. Connor Geeky's played tremendous. He's a power forward. He's been really good. Maverick Lamoureux is a 6'7" defenseman that can log big minutes. And Sammy Lipkin, he's not playing in this tournament this year. He played last year for Team USA. He's a star player, one of the leading scorers in ECAC right now, playing at Quinnipiac, won a national championship last year. That's just three guys that we're touching on that have tentacles into the World Junior. They've done a nice job, Jimmy. They really have quietly getting players. Matthias Michelli, he's a tremendous NHL player.
Yep.
Never gets talked about.
No. So, it's great, though. The timing of it is great, too, Pierre, right? Because of what's going on with the whole arena situation and just the future of that organization. To have this team start to show hope on the ice and potential there, it must be great for, the people behind the scenes there, because it's kind of a distraction, and it's a good distraction at that.
If you look at, we just talked about Auston Matthews. Can he get to 70 goals? He's from Scottsdale, Arizona.
Yep.
Matthew Nyes, his line mate, he's from Scottsdale, Arizona. Josh Doan, who's drafted by Arizona and is playing for their farm team in Houston, he's from Arizona. I mean, so Arizona, Commissioner Bettman had this right, by the way. And a lot of people like to give him a hard time. He got it right with the expansion footprint. If you look at how many players are coming out of Southern California, if you look at how many players are coming out of Arizona, if you start to look at some of the players coming out of Nevada, you see some of the players that have come out of Texas. Look at the players that are coming out of Florida right now. They're all tied into NHL teams going there, and then this footprint expanding because of the talented athletes that see hockey, love hockey, decide to play hockey, and become really good at it.
Yeah.
So, I think and I hope that Arizona can maintain a team. They need to get a rink to do that. But if they can, Jimmy, that would be huge news for the league. It would be tremendous for hockey. It really would.
And I remember, Pierre, I think it was maybe our last episode and one right before, we were talking about the Whalers and then Connecticut hockey. And you made a great point, too, there. The players that go to play in these places, usually because the weather's not so nice, they can golf a lot, they end up staying down there, right? And then they produce hockey players, whether it's their sons or whether they start coaching. And so they really just sort of filter out into the grassroots level of hockey there. And I'm with you. Look, do I think, if we reach a point that sooner or later you got to reach a point and say, all right, it's either put up or shut up with the arena thing in Arizona. But that doesn't mean that it was the wrong move to go there in the first place. No. And I'm with you. I know a lot of people don't like Gary Bettman out there, but you got to give credit where it's due. He nailed it on these teams. And part of them going there was to spread the game and build the game of hockey in the United States. And he's done that. So you got to give him credit.
Yeah, I'll tell you one thing. If you're an owner, you really like him because franchise values have just gone unbelievably through the roof. When I first started in the league, the NHL was a $500 million a year business. That's what it was. It was a $500 million a year business. Here we are 34 years later. It's a $5.2 billion a year business.
Wow.
$5.2 billion. There used to be 60 full-time employees at the NHL offices between Montreal, Toronto, and New York. Now they're over 500.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, the league has done very well under Commissioner Bettman, and he deserves a lot of credit for that. I think it's part of why he's in the Hockey Hall of Fame. That being said, think about it. How's expansion worked out in Nevada? Pretty good.
Oh, yeah.
First professional team to go in there. I think expansion with Seattle's worked out pretty well, Jimmy.
Yep.
Pretty well. There's been one failed expansion franchise, Atlanta.
Yeah. And yet they might go back there.
One never knows. It's a viable market. If you look at some of the East Coast League teams that are down, whether it's in Savannah, whether it's in Greenville, South Carolina, Charleston, South Carolina, Jacksonville, Florida, I coached one in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. 7,000 people a night. Biloxi, Mississippi, where Bruce Boudreau coached, they used to sell out those games. In Lafayette, Louisiana, they get 14,000 people for hockey. I think hockey could work in the South. You just got to get the right ownership group and the right people running it. But I don't know why Atlanta couldn't work. I just don't know.
I'm with you. All right, let's go back to the questions here because we have about 8 minutes left. Let's throw one up. All right, Michael Sullivan. He does a great job covering the Bruins for some outlets here in Boston. Love the pod. Do you think Poitras's experience on the defensive end of the game and playing meaningful minutes in the third, closing out games, is helping his case to play that same role when he comes back to Boston? Pierre, I think we answered this when he went there. Great question. Good points.
Michael, fantastic. That's so spot on. I think that's part of why the Bruins want him to go. The other thing, too, is you're playing in your own peer group, so you're scrutinized a lot, but you're not going to get out-muscled. More times than not, you're not going to get out-muscled. In the NHL, you could see, and I brought it up to Jimmy. It's ironic, Jimmy, we're talking about Arizona. I called you that Saturday afternoon. I was up in Canada. It was freezing and snowing. I said, Jimmy, they got to do something with this guy because he's overwhelmed right now. And that happens. He's 18, 19 – he's 19. 19-year-old kid. It happens. So I actually think this is smart. I do think it will help him defensively, but I think one of the other reasons why the Bruins want him there, to get him to dominate with the puck. And if you've watched him play, he's dominating.
And he scored again tonight, too. I mean, I know it's a blowout, but he scored again. So, and just quickly before we go to the next question, too, I want to talk about this with you maybe next episode, okay? I want you to think about this because I don't know. I was giving it a thought. Maybe I'm nuts. If he comes back and they still don't see what they need at center, do you put him at wing? Or does that stunt his development?
I'd have to think
about that, right? Okay.
I don't want to be too quick on that one.
All right. We'll give it some time. All right. Let's go to the next question. Read on Twitter. This is from Vid Zombie. Great name. Read on Twitter. I know that some pro scouts still think Lane Hudson won't be able to handle the play in the NHL. Thoughts?
Well, a lot of NHL scouts said that about a lot of undersized defensemen. I remember one guy, his name was Brian Rafalski, who was never drafted out of the University of Wisconsin, had to go spend, I think, 4 or 5 years playing in Sweden and Finland, came back and was a pretty good player for the New Jersey Devils. I remember a kid that played at Harvard. His name's Adam Fox. A lot of people wondered, if he's going to play, drafted by Calgary, traded to Carolina, and eventually finds his way to the New York Rangers, has won a Norris Trophy, probably making, $8 to $9 million a year. Never affected him. Lane Hudson needs muscle mass. Brain-wise, skill-wise, intelligence-wise, in terms of hockey, there are no issues. So once he adds 7 to 15 pounds of muscle mass, which he will do, no, I don't think that's going to be an issue. And I think you agree with me, Jimmy.
Yeah, totally agree with you. And I mean, it's just the way the game is now. It's not – size is important. Don't get us wrong. But it can be compensated for if you got the skill.
Jimmy, he's not going to be on the ice in the last 2 minutes of a game defending a 1-goal lead.
No.
But if you're down by a goal, he's going to be on the ice all the time in the last 2 minutes of a game.
And on the power play.
I ran an NHL bench with the defense in the Stanley Cup playoffs, and matchups are really important. So you got to know that you got to be an expert on the 6 guys that are sitting in front of you and you're about to put on the ice. And every guy's got a strength and every guy's got a weakness. So you got to make sure you play to the strength and weaknesses of the guy you're putting on the ice. And in his case, Lane Hudson, the offensive magic is overwhelming. It's just overwhelming.
It's great. And I'm so excited for Montreal Canadiens fans. They're going to love him up there. All right, Pierre, I think we got one more here and we might be out. Ooh, great question. Shane Oliver, who's been a regular listener. We appreciate it, Shane. The eye test. How does the USHL get players like Adam Gajan, I hope I'm pronouncing the name right, okay, to come to North America, and why USHL over CHL?
Well, in this case, Adam Gajan is a player drafted in the second round by the Chicago Blackhawks. He's a tremendous goalie for the Slovaks. I think the biggest thing is that maybe Chicago Blackhawks might push for that, or he has an agent that works with him that says, rather than go here, we want you to play more minutes there. The USHL is a formidable league, just like the BCHL. I think the 2 best leagues for developing college players, the BCHL, we've already had Fred Harbinson on, and the USHL. And I've seen a whack of games in both leagues for a lot of years. And so we talked about we talked with Bob Motzko.
That's right.
As a player, as a coach.
Yeah.
And he recruits players out of the BC League. He recruits players out of the USHL. And so I think they're all really good leagues. But for Adam Gajan in particular, I think he might have had an agent that put him there, or he might have had Chicago pushing for him to go to the USHL.
Situation, yep. And look, too, I want to say about the USHL, and I don't know we have time here to really get into the history and the transgression of it, Pierre, but I remember back when I was, coming out of high school, a good friend of mine, Chris Masters, you might know him, runs the Junior Bruins. Yep. And so he went out before he was going to play at BC, but he went out and did a year in Dubuque before he ended up at BC. And back then, people are like, Dubuque, USHL, what is this? And now it's just so common that these kids do this for a year before they go to their college team.
So another person we had on the eye test, Greg Brown. Greg Brown has been an assistant coach at Boston College after a tremendous pro career, both here in North America and in Europe, and a tremendous collegiate career as a player and an Olympian. Then he went and became an assistant coach with the New York Rangers, working, in a situation which was started as a rebuild and eventually ended up being a major rebuild. He gets fired, and you know where he goes? His next job? Dubuque.
Yep.
He's the head coach at Dubuque.
Fighting Saints.
He did. He coached at Dubuque for 1 year, and now he's the head coach of, depending on the week, either number 1, number 2, or number 3 in the NCAA. Yeah. He's a tremendous coach.
Yeah, it works for coaches.
He went from the NHL to the USHL.
There you go. I know it's come a long way. It's a great league, great feeder league. Well, listen, we're short today. We're both pressed for time, but we will go longer for an hour. And I think, Pierre, since we're doing all these questions a lot on Wednesdays, I'm going to start to do this a little more often. But we'll have an announcement to make on Friday about that. But until then, I want to wish everybody, I hope you're enjoying your holidays. I hope a lot of you haven't had to go back to work yet. You're kicking back, watching some hockey, watching some college football. And we will talk to you at 4 p.m. Eastern on Friday. We'll go 4 to 5 live, so you can line up the questions again. I'll tweet it out again before we get there. And Pierre, I'm glad that you're back from Ireland and glad you had a good time. Did you hear any Pogues over there?
You know what? It was amazing how many people were talking about the Pogues.
Yeah, he was a legend.
And on Christmas Eve, they always have a free concert down
in the square,
main part of the square, near St. Stephen's Square. I didn't go to it, but I understand it was a celebration of the Pogues. So
yeah, I saw it on Twitter, and they all sang "Fairy Tale in New York." It was about 1,000 people singing. So it was pretty amazing.
I think I sent you a picture from right near there.
Yeah, I love those pictures.
Yeah,
that's great.
I actually had my senses and my wits about me too, Jimmy. So it was all good.
I'm sure you're like my co-host, James Patrick Murphy, is going to appreciate these pictures for sure. Someday I'll get over there. All right. Well, listen, it's been another edition of the Eye Test here on the Sick Podcast Network. I'm Jimmy Murphy. He's Pierre McGuire. We'll talk to you next time.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Eye Test with Pierre McGuire and Jimmy Murphy on YouTube, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.